I'm Beth Finch. I am today interviewing Marie Crocker. We are at the Brewster Ladies Library in the Historic Room, and this is Tuesday, November 14th, 2017. So Anna, welcome and thank you for being with us today. Would you just, for the record, give me your whole name again?
Anna Marie Crocker.
Okay. Do you ever use your maiden name?
No.
No. Okay.
Except to identify myself sometimes.
If you really need
Used to be, I was Alice and Ollie Lund's daughter, and then I was my husband's wife, and then I was my children's mother.
Yes.
And all that.
So you told me that you were born and grew up where?
In Kearny, New Jersey.
Okay. And what did your folks do when you were there?
Well, it was during the Depression. My father, we were quite poor actually. My father struggled to find work, and my mother did cooking jobs and housekeeping jobs, and then we were able to, then when the war came, he was able to get a better job, so and a steady job. So that got us through to through the end of the war, and then we came up here because my mother worked as a young girl at the Nickerson estate. She was a kitchen maid. She grew up in Cambridge, and Mrs. Nickerson used to come up to Boston to interview girls to come down and work on the estate. And she and a friend of hers came down. My mother was in the kitchen, and we called her Aunt Ethel, was an upstairs maid. And while she was here, she made friends with some people around down here, so that when she wanted to reconnect with them, so after the war, she got in touch with them, and they came up to see them, and through that decided to move up here.
So it was your mother who got the family to Cape Cod, not your father so much. All right.
And since then, all her brothers have moved up here, and the whole family moved up here.
What is their last name?
Landers.
Okay.
Her youngest brother was chief of police in Orleans for a number of years. The first time my father came down, he came down on the train to visit her. This was way back before they were married, which would have been 1927. And it was one of those gray, rainy days. Nothing was very attractive, and he hated it.
Oh, that's good.
But when he came back in the 40s to visit, he fell in love with the place. He was born and brought up in Sweden, and I think maybe it reminded him a little bit of where he grew up.
Yeah.
But anyway, we lived next door. We bought the house. They bought the house on the other side of the Baptist Church, which is now Candleberry Inn.
Oh, yes.
And that's where we grew up. My mother had in those days it was called a guest house, but she served meals, and it was called a welcome house.
A welcome house. Was that a generic name, or is that just what she called it?
That's just what they called it. And they rented rooms and served breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
It's a lot of cooking.
And all the girls, I had two sisters, and worked, cleaning rooms and waiting on tables and so forth. And they advertised in the Swedish newspaper in New York, so they got a lot of Swedes that came up here and stayed. And then you'd walk to the beach, Breakwater Beach,
Sure.
and they didn't mind doing that.
So how many rooms, how many guests could you have?
Well, therefore, about possibly 6 rooms,
Yep.
I think, and 2 bathrooms.
Yes.
No private room, no private bathrooms.
Right.
But people were used to that in those days. they didn't mind that. So,
What kind of meals would your mother cook? What would people have for breakfast or for dinner?
well, no typical breakfast. She had done cooking in a small restaurant, so she had a good cat. But being Swedish, she was a good cook anyway, so, and had good imagination. And we had a little garden patch, so what was coming in the garden, she cooked and so forth. But they always had coffee in the afternoon, Swedish coffee. Swedes are used to that. Coffee in the afternoon with coffee bread.
Lovely.
My grandmother made coffee bread.
So your mother was Swedish as well.
Yeah, she was born here though, but her parents were Swedish.
Now, your father had different things that he did here?
Well, he struggled a bit. He did anything he could do when he first came up here. And what got us through one winter was hauling rock from, they're building a jetty over in Falmouth or somewhere around, and he was hauling rock. But then he was able to buy some land on Millstone Road, where Brewster Green is now.
Yes.
And he started a dairy farm.
Yep.
It was called Pine Ridge Dairy.
Pine Ridge Dairy.
And that's where the rock came from, taking rock from there and selling it, well, using it to make pasture, the land to make pasture, so he had a lot of rock to get out of there.
So he not only cleared the pasture, he sold the rock
Yeah.
to Falmouth.
Well, yes, they're building jetties somewhere, I think it was to some trucking company, taking them over to Falmouth. So they built up quite a milk business, and my mother helped deliver, and
Now, I've heard that people could just come to your home, which is now the Candleberry, and there would be a place
in the
to get
barn,
milk.
it was an old barn, but there was a refrigerator there, and they kept milk in there so they could come in and get milk.
And there'd just be an honor system. You leave the
Oh,
money
yeah.
and take the milk.
Yeah.
I don't think I asked you your parents' names.
Lund, Alice and Ollie Lund,
Okay. How do you spell Ollie?
O-L-L-E.
Okay. Now, did he also farm down where the community garden is now?
No, well, yes, eventually, he and my husband started raising some things down there. They had the first farm stand, I think, ever. When they had the corn coming in, they just put a stand on the side of the road
Yeah.
and sold the corn. They rented that land from the Thorndikes, I think
Right.
it was across the street. And yeah, they did that for several years.
So it was mostly corn they raised there?
Yeah, corn, but also I know beets and
Oh, so it was real farmer's market kind of thing?
yeah,
Okay.
typical.
It wasn't forage for the cows?
No,
Okay.
no. But
So he ran that farm for a long time?
yes, he did, and then it became Woodstone Farm, the horse
Yeah.
place.
Yep. So did you work the farm when you were, now, how old were you when the family moved here?
About 17.
Okay.
I just graduated from high school.
And you didn't stay at first, you went off somewhere?
In the fall I did, and then I came back.
Okay.
I went off 2 or 3 times and then came back.
And then came back. It seems like you could have been very useful in the house business and in the farm business.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So were you expected to do a lot of different kinds of chores?
Well, I guess that first fall we were here, my father and I picked a cranberry bog for a man he had met from East Harwich. And we picked it because it had poison ivy on it. And we didn't get poison ivy, we thought, but we both got the worst cases we ever had after that. And I think it immunized me against poison ivy. But anyway, I did a lot of odd, different things.
Now, you had two sisters,
Yes.
and what were their names?
Naomi, she was the youngest. Her name is a Finnish name. And Greta. Greta married Sheldon Breyer, that's a name in town.
Yeah.
His father had cows, and he was an electrician. Unfortunately, both of them died fairly young.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, it was one of those things.
Um,
I feel badly for my parents and knowing they lost two daughters.
Yeah. Did Mamie live around here?
Yes, she lived in town, and Greta lived in town.
The Breyer Farm was on Breyer Lane.
Mhm.
It's the house that has the big barn next to it, extending out from
Yeah,
it.
that used to be the old Breyer farm.
That was the old Breyer Farm. So they lived there.
Mm. No, they didn't live there. Her Sheldon's father lived there,
Okay.
but they lived on. They built a house on Tubman Road.
Oh, all right. Now, how did you and Larry meet?
Well, after a baseball game, back in those days, every town had a baseball team made up of town boys, not college kids.
Right.
And I remember Larry telling my uncle when he first moved down here, the way to get yourself known is to get on the baseball team. Because my uncle did play baseball, so he did that. But, and then after the games, there was a little ice cream place next to what used to be what was Williams Garage. It's a mobile station now.
And there was an ice cream place right next to that.
Yeah, called Pete's Place or something. I think it was Pete's. And
Well, now I'm trying to think, is there a building now that would have been that?
no, it's been
just gone.
taken down.
Okay.
Yeah. And we just kind of met in there
Of course.
after a game and started, going out.
Yeah. Now, Larry's family, unlike yours, had been here for
Oh,
generations.
yeah, they were, his father used to say part of his family came over on the Mayflower and the other half, and one other part met it. because he had one of his past, they passed in this history, married an Indian. And that's why he said that.
That's a source of pride today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he said he remembers his grandfather, or his great-grandfather. When he stood at sunset facing the sun like this, was told never to disturb him when he was doing that.
So it was as recent as his great-grandfather.
Well, maybe I don't know,
Okay.
great-grandfather.
But someone he remembered anyway.
Right.
My goodness. So the Crockers were, what kind of things were they doing when let's just do it easily. What was Larry's father doing? What was his work?
Well, he was a salesman, a grocery salesman for many years, and then he brought the Brewster store.
Okay.
And had that for many years.
So it was Crocker's store.
It was called, I think it was still called the Brewster. I'm not sure what it was
Okay.
called, I don't remember. And it was a real general store. You could go in and buy groceries, you could buy tools, you could buy a lot of things in the bulk and anything people needed to live. They delivered, because when Larry was growing, in his teen years, worked in the store and delivered to people way in the woods and, people.
So did he have a car, a truck?
Yeah, station wagon.
A station wagon
Yeah.
to deliver things. Huh.
And, no, they delivered.
So would it have tools? Would it have
Yeah,
sewing
had
things?
yeah.
It was a real
Almost
general store.
anything people needed, it had.
That sounds very useful.
Well, it was a real store.
Yeah. But he didn't go into the store after his father.
No, his father finally sold it and started the insurance business in Orleans.
Oh.
The Henry Crocker Insurance Agency.
Yeah.
And then Larry was in the service and then came back and finished his college and went into the insurance business.
And that's where he stayed.
Right, till he retired, sold out.
Where was his growing up home? Where did he grow up? Do you know?
Larry?
Yeah.
In town here.
I mean, do you know where?
Well, the house on the hill, before you go into Stony Brook Road.
I wondered about that.
On the left.
Okay. Yes.
Well, that was their last home. They lived in other rentals.
Mhm.
I think one time a place in Brewster Park and in another place on Briar Lane, I think. And then they lived in the house, can't think of the name of I can never remember the name of that street. As you go up Stony Brook, the first road on the left.
Is that?
It cuts
Great
way-
Fields,
Great
yeah.
Fields Road.
Right.
Yeah, his grandmother lived on one corner,
Uh-huh.
and then they lived in the house, that big white house. They lived there,
Now,
and then they built the house up on the hill.
was there something about, did they have a store and/or a post office in the house or as part of the house?
There was a separate building, I think, in West Brewster where, the house, the triangle.
I know the triangle.
Okay, the house facing the triangle.
Yes,
That was the location of the
but it was
store.
It was a different house. It was a different building.
Right,
But it's right where there's a smallish house that faces the triangle
right.
with its two sides on 6A and on Stony Brook. That little house.
Yeah.
And that's where, no, but that was not
I
a,
think it was a store and post office.
okay.
And I think maybe his father's parents had that.
Okay. But that was not a going concern when you knew them.
No,
That was older.
no, they were long gone.
Yeah, okay. Did his mother do anything outside the home?
Yes, she came down here as a teacher, as so many women do, and
Yes,
married a local.
yes.
And she did teach down here for a while, and then she married Henry Crocker.
Uh-huh.
And then they had her children, and then she worked in the insurance agency.
Oh, did she?
Mhm.
So it really was a family business.
Yes, it was.
Well, okay, so now, when were you and Larry married?
1949.
Okay. And how many children did you have?
3,
By that time, Larry was just in the insurance business.
right.
Okay. And your children are, give me their names.
David, who has Crocker Nurseries.
I think that's wonderful. So this family has been going on in many different professions, many different careers, but always doing well. So
Yes,
David's
or
running
trying to.
Crocker Nurseries. Okay.
And Ellen was the oldest. She went to work, she went off Cape. She worked for the what used to be known as the General Accounting Office, but it's
Oh,
it's now changed to the Government Accountability Office, which makes it more sense to what they were doing.
Yeah.
And my youngest daughter unfortunately passed away.
Can you tell me her name and what happened to her?
Her name was Tamsin Crocker, Tamsin Snow Crocker, because there were snows in the
Yeah.
family background. And Tamsin was an old family name on the Crocker side also. And it was just a freaky kind of thing. She was pregnant and got chicken pox when she was 30. And I knew she had chicken pox when she was younger, but she was compromised, I think. Her immune system was down because she was pregnant. And it just was complications from that.
Oh, how dreadful. Yeah.
But it was not good, but you get over it.
So does David have children?
Yes, he has 3 daughters.
And are they working at the nursery?
No, one has come back and is working to help take it over at some point. And one's in Florida and one's in Falmouth.
Well, Falmouth sounds good. So when your children were growing up, where did they go to school?
They went to what was Brewster Elementary School.
Yeah.
And it was like a little private school. When David and Ellen started, there were 16 in the class. And then each class moved up all together. And then by the time Tamsin went, there was 6 years between David and Tamsin. By the time she started, there were 30. And so the town had started growing then.
So what dates would that have been? When was Tamsin born?
1959.
So this would have been in the early 70s maybe, when she was in school.
Yeah.
So it had grown that much in 6 years, from 16 children in a grade to 30 children
Yeah,
in a grade.
and there were 8 grades in the school.
Right.
And they had good teachers, and I know David said he wouldn't have gotten through college English without Mrs. Dunn. She used to write more on their homework things. She used to write more than they did in a correction on me.
So when Ellen and David were going to school, there were 8 grades at what is now the Stony Brook. Well, no, what is now the town hall, town offices. That's right. So when Tamsin came through, there were a lot more children.
And they got more every year, so by
Yeah.
that time they couldn't handle the 7th and 8th grades here.
Yeah.
So they rented or leased the St. Joan of Arc School in Orleans, which wasn't being used anymore. So they set up a little system over there, which really wasn't very great.
It was a school, though. It was an unused
connected
school
to Brewster School, but
Yeah.
there's something lost in that, in the move, I think.
So did you feel that she was not as well educated, as happy during those years?
Well, it wasn't organized that well, and it was a very odd situation.
I don't think it lasted too long, did it?
No, it didn't. Because then they were working on the middle school to make it regionalized, so then they moved over there, and that made...
So when Tamsin went to high school, where did she go?
Well, she went 1 year to Nauset Regional,
Okay,
and then they started the tech school.
Oh, all
So
right.
she went, so her education was pretty
Yeah, she tried out a lot of
mixed up.
schools.
Yes. So then she moved to the tech school and
Yeah.
graduated from there.
Okay. So that must have been just about the time the high school was being finished.
Yeah, they had built it then. I didn't realize that it wasn't built as well as it could have been after what we hear now. But it was a good school.
Yeah. How did you feel about the tech school?
I thought it was good. You know, tech schools way back then didn't have that great a name. They used to think they'd send the problem kids to the tech school, but that wasn't really the case. And they've just improved every year, right along, so it's an excellent school now.
That's what I understand.
Yeah.
So what was she trained in?
Horticulture. She took
Oh, wow.
the horticulture course.
Well, did she ever have a chance to work with your father?
No.
No.
She was too young to work with my father, but she did work with David for a while at the nursery.
Oh, so he'd already started the nursery by then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then she went off. She went to California for a while, and she was wandering for a while, and ended up going to Paul Smith College in New York and got a training in trees and wood stuff that she liked. So.
Yeah. Well, while you were living in Brewster as a young wife and mother, and then maybe later on, what kind of activities were there for women in the town?
Actually, not many, really.
Yeah.
There was a women's club and the garden club, but that was we always had the feeling those are for the older women.
Yeah.
For younger women, there was, the Baptist Church started a young women's group. But that was about all.
Yeah. Did you have a group of friends that you would see or visit or do things with?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did a lot of potluck.
Yeah.
There's a 20-30 club that a lot of young married couples belong to.
Was that part of the church, or was that something you just put it together?
That was just a group that had gotten together, and then they started an investment club, and you kind of made your own, group of people interested in one thing would make it enlarge it a little bit to something.
You know, the town recently has been doing these vision programs and asking people what they value about Brewster. And a lot of people talk about walking trails or being on the beach or various recreational kinds of things outdoors. Did you all ever do that?
Oh yeah, Larry was great. Mainly clamming.
Okay, yeah.
It's just, and to me the most wonderful thing in the world is being out on the flats.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's nothing else going on in the whole world. And it's so beautiful early in the morning or at sunset time. That afterglow that is out there, it is just so beautiful. Yeah, we did enjoy that. They didn't have walking trails in those days.
There weren't?
No.
No. There must have been old roads that you could walk.
Well, there were, but not that much. You know, we'd walk on the roads around weren't as developed as the roads are now, so.
Right. What kind of activities did the church have for you?
Well, there's certainly a whole lot more at the Baptist Church now than there used to be, but there was the women's group and Sunday school, choir, and that's about all.
You told me before we started this recording that you and your family worked with the Salvation Army before you came here.
Yeah, my mother was very involved with that.
Okay. But there wasn't a branch down here?
No, eventually there was in Hyannis,
Uh-huh.
but we never got involved with it. We started coming here to the Baptist Church. But where we were in New Jersey, the ones we were connected to were the Swedish ones.
Oh,
And there was a whole section around New York, Swedish, and it was a chance for them to get together.
yes. There is something of a Finnish community around West Barnstable.
And yeah,
Was that of any social interest to you?
no,
No, that was a different group.
yes.
I have heard that there were sometimes children brought from Boston to come for the summer and sometimes stay longer. Were you involved in any of that?
No,
Okay.
no. I don't remember that.
I asked you ahead of time if you could remember the names of the Baptist ministers you have known. You want to try?
I still can't get one of them.
Was Mr. Griffin the first one you knew?
Yeah, Charles Griffin was the first one. And then Kenneth MacArthur. And the one I can't remember, his name was Ed, I think, and her name was Miriam, but I cannot think of their last name. And I'm not sure, and Edward Elmore was here. I'm thinking that was him, and after him was Don Mills.
Yeah.
And then after Don Mills was someone named Coleman. And then I can't think of this fellow's name either, but he was very popular, and he started drawing a lot of people to the Baptist Church. And then after he left, Doug Scalise came, and he brought a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and he's been here a long time.
Yeah. I really should ask David and not you, but what kind of recreational activities were there for kids when your children were growing up? Was there anything structured, or what kind of things would they do after school or in the summer?
Well, they had Little League. They
Yeah.
had Little Leagues back then. And Cub Scouts, and Boy Scouts, and Brownies. But nothing, I don't think there was anything much more after that.
But tell me about swimming lessons.
Oh yeah, the town organized swimming lessons. It was Red Cross swimming lessons.
But you were instrumental in that.
Well, another lady, Beverly Gage, and I just did the schedules every week and got them in the paper and published the names of who moved up to
Oh,
the
that's
different
nice.
levels.
So
And hired the people to teach. And
So if you passed your crawl test, you could get
Right.
in the paper. I want you to tell people who will not believe this. The scheduling you had to do was not just we would meet at, if you're at this level, you meet at 9 o'clock. If you're at this level, you meet at 10 o'clock. There was a wrinkle to that, wasn't there?
oh yeah, we had to go by the tides. When the tides were in the morning, we could be at the bay, and then when they weren't right, we'd go to Long Pond.
And how early in the morning did you have those little children out in the freezing water of
No,
Cape Cod
it
Bay?
wasn't that early, about 9 o'clock. There weren't that many children, you know. In those days, it wasn't a huge number.
Yeah. So Monday would be 9 o'clock, Tuesday would be 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and they had the different levels. They had, you know, the beginners and
Yes.
then up to the intermediates and the swimmers. But and the families used to go and they'd spend the whole day at the beach.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was pretty much all that was at the beach in those days, with the families taking swimming lessons. You'd never believe it. Now to see the parking lots.
Yeah.
When we first moved here to this house, I remember there's only about 4 families that used the beach, Breakwater Beach. And so it was empty, and it was, we had control. And there was a row of bathhouses down there that belonged to the Considine House.
Mhm.
which is now the Brewster Inn and Chowder House.
Right. So if I stayed at the Considine House, I would have my own private bathhouse to visit?
Yeah, I believe so.
Nice. The beaches were wider then, too.
Yeah, I guess so. They weren't hugely wider, but,
To have room for the bathhouses, I'm thinking.
well, they were up in the dunes, kind of.
Oh, I see. All right, I see.
You know, those were popular. There were a line of bathhouses down at Crosby, I think Crosby Landing too,
Mhm.
connected to some cottages, I think, or not connected to, but for people that
Yes.
lived in or rented some cottages somewhere.
Well, now Brewster has had people coming for summer vacations for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Did they not fill the beaches?
Well, there weren't that many.
Okay.
We didn't have the tons of people we have now.
That's right. There's so many people living here.
Yeah,
What do you think the population of the town was in, what,
I have
1945?
no idea. I can't remember that.
Yeah. But if the schools had so few children, and then you saw a big increase later.
Yeah, it just snowballed to
Yeah.
what we have now.
Right, right. Well, I want to ask you, did your children ever get into trouble?
I don't think so. Not that I know of.
No, maybe that's the answer. I'm trying to get some good stories out of people, but I tell you, we're having a hard time.
Well, you know, it isn't like nowadays. It's little things
Mhm.
that were pretty much harmless. But I remember my uncle, who was chief of police in Orleans, because he knew all the parents, and the kids knew that he knew their parents.
Yeah.
So all he had to do was give them a little warning, and he didn't reprimand them too much, but he just gave them something to think about anyway. So, and them kids didn't get into really bad stuff then. Drugs hadn't come in yet.
Right, right. There were a very few restaurants in town. A couple of really fine ones and a couple more comfortable ones.
Latham's was a real nice one, where the Latham Center is now.
Yeah,
That was a wonderful restaurant. A lot of girls, it was a good job to get there and get a job as a waiter or waitress at the Latham's.
yeah.
Because a lot of the people that go there and then go to the theater at the Dennis Playhouse.
Oh, yeah.
And they serve very good food.
The Tip Top House?
Yeah, that was nice. Tip Top, that was a lot of rooms and served some meals, yeah.
Would you go to the Considine House for dinner, or was that mostly for the people who
Oh,
stayed there?
there's dinner. Yeah, I worked there as a waitress.
Oh, all right.
At one time.
Yeah.
One of my other small jobs.
Oh, yes, you were telling me you had several small jobs. You don't have to tell me great detail, but just, I think it's represented. I know when I came here, they said everybody has 3 jobs, because one was
Well,
not
yeah.
enough. What were some of the things you did?
Well, when I first came back, after being away a couple of times and came back to settle, I worked at the Cape Cod Times as a proofreader.
Okay.
And
And was the office in Hyannis then?
yes.
Okay.
And there's another man who lived up the street who was he worked somewhere else as a printer. So I rode over with him.
Oh,
And because there was no bus service.
And they did their own printing right there.
Yes, they did at that time, but he worked in another
Okay.
place printing. And or maybe I rode over with him. There was a bus service, but not very often. I might have taken the bus home. And then I worked at, I started work at the Cape Cod Bank and Trust Company
The Cape Cod Bank and Trust, okay. And where was that?
in Harwich. You know, we're on Main Street in Harwich, this big building. The Cape Cod Bank and Trust was one side of the building, the Cape Cod 5 was at the other. And that was the home office, or the offices of both of them.
That was the only
Yeah,
bank for each of them was in Harwich Port.
I think so.
Oh my.
And then the Cape Cod Bank and Trust opened the Orleans office, and that was the first bank away from there that they did, and now they've expanded. Now it's TD Bank.
Right, right. Well, you've had a lot of experiences, from cranberry picker to waitress to
Well,
newspapers and
nothing-
banks and.
A lot of little things, nothing great.
Yeah. Well, I think you've given us a real slice of what life was like. Is there anything more that you would really like to tell us that you think people should know or would be interested in?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I can't think of anything really. Nothing stands out.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah. Oh, you're very welcome. I don't know how much I've contributed, but
You told us a lot of things we didn't know about. Thank you very much.